Good morning or good evening, everybody, and welcome to 2026 and the first New Year episode of the Customer Driven Leader podcast, where we explore the critical role that the leader has in creating and sustaining winning cultures that positively impact customer experiences. I'm your host, Dr. James Killian. Thank you for being with us. And this is usually the part where I say thank you to the XM Global Collaborative for sponsoring this great event. But in this case, I actually get to say thank you, Tom DeWitt, founder of the XM Global Collaborative, for sponsoring this great event. Thanks. And I really appreciate you being here, Tom.
Yeah, me too. This is great. It's not very often I'm on this side of the microphone, so
It's
kind of
true.
it's
It's
kind of
true.
fun.
I
It's
mean,
kind of
you've
fun.
definitely had your stage persona out there for a
Yeah,
while, but
yeah.
you've just been running around. So for anybody who doesn't know Tom, he is founder and former director now of the CXM at Michigan State University program, where I was faculty along with prior guests like Lou Carbone. A really great experience, and I can't thank Tom enough for giving us all that role. In his role, he was dedicated to advancing customer experience management globally through all kinds of programs, workshops, academic initiatives, and as previously mentioned, he's now founder of the XM Global Collaborative, which I'm going to let him tell you a little bit more about, but was essentially founded to expand professionalism and education across both employee and customer experience practices in a worldwide forum. So, Tom, I always tease as a little bit like, where's Waldo? So I asked Tom where he is at this point in the world, and he said he's in Thailand for the foreseeable future. So,
Yep.
really appreciate you being here late in the evening with us. Thanks, Tom.
You bet. It's great to be here.
Yeah. So I always, as you know, having sponsored this podcast, I always start and finish with the same kind of an approach. And so with you, I'll do the same here. So I would like you to finish the sentence. A leader, team, or culture is customer driven when what?
Oh, I should have prepared better for this. Should have prepared better for this. Um, I, you know, I truly believe it's when everyone in the under organization understands what it means to be a customer-centric organization.
Mm,
I think we trivialize it, play lip service to it. You know, 9 times out of 10, if you ask a leader, is your organization customer driven? They'll say it is. Or is it customer centric? They'll say it is. But
mm.
when you actually break it down to their operating practices, it falls apart. Or maybe the leader purports to be customer driven and says he leads an organization that's customer centric. But question is, does that make it its way down to every employee in the organization? And 9 times out of 10, it doesn't. So
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's a great response, actually, and it really aligns with some previous guests who I've had on, other speaking that I've done, and then, as you know, I've just completed writing a book and lots of interviews as part of this book, and I think I've made you aware that this is part of your interview, so you're going in the book
yeah,
too.
no
Uh,
pressure.
but a very
No.
consistent theme that I've heard from expert practitioners like Matt Eagle and Professor Rob Markey from Harvard Business School and Bain. Something that I think is pretty consistent is they say that no leader really goes into a role with the goal of not being customer driven,
Mhm,
right? They all have
mhm,
good
mhm,
intentions, but to your
mhm.
point, it's the little things, the daily practices, the habits. And if those aren't there and the structure isn't there to support it, then the tendency to want to be customer driven may still be there, but in practice, you just don't see it happening.
Yeah, yeah. In fact,
So when we think about,
yep, yep.
go ahead,
Go
Tom,
ahead,
sorry.
go ahead. No,
No, I was
I've
just going
got,
to say,
yeah, I often utilize a three-dimension 15 item scale for organizational customer centricity and dimensions, but it's been a while since I've used it now. Um, but uh, whenever I think that the first part is um, leadership, really around leadership, vision, and so forth. The second one is more around collaboration, and the last one is around implementation, which is real operating practices. And they start out okay, you know. They maybe customer satisfaction measures go up alongside financial measures. The leader of the organization reinforces it verbally and maybe even through his or her own behaviors exhibits it. But then when it comes down to actual practices, people working across the organization and sharing of data and encouraging employees to make recommendations and have those operationalized, um, it just falls apart. So,
yeah.
um, and that's why I feel that, for experience management to truly be effective, it's got to come from an organization that's truly customer centric. So you've got to, you've got to lay out the foundation, not just in terms of what you talk about, but your operating practices across the firm on a daily basis. So
Totally agree with that. I mean
yeah.
that lack of structure and follow through
Yeah.
is a really big issue, and really something that's central to the thesis behind the customer driven leader that I'm really pursuing and that I pursued as part of the research is because leaders today are under more stress and pressure to deliver short-term results, and
Mhm.
unfortunately, that tends to take away the long game perspective in a lot of cases. And so
Mhm.
you see people engaging in these behaviors that may, achieve the goals for the quarter or for the year, but
Mhm.
they're doing it
Mhm.
in a way
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
unfortunately has a compounding negative effect on future brand love.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
when we think about that structure and process, and we'll come back to that for sure. I definitely want to talk more about that. But also let's make it a little bit personal as we start moving towards the rest of the conversation here, Tom. Um, so can you think about like a great example of a bad experience that you've had as a consumer that has impacted how you think about experience management?
Sure. Sure. Uh, I was staying in a hotel. I won't say where or the hotel chain, but um, had flown a long distance to get there and um, was traveling with my wife and woke up at, when you wake up at 3 or 4 in the morning, it's like, should I go back to sleep or should I try to get up? Or finally decided I'm make a cup of coffee. And there was instant coffee in the room. There was a steam kettle um, there. And, usually the kettle's unplugged, right? And
Mhm.
oh, filled it with water, went to go plug it in. And lo and behold, the kettle didn't fit any of the outlets in the room except the one the TV was plugged in, this big TV. So I had to physically move the TV, unplug it, put the steam kettle in. And to me, what it illustrated is, what I find often is organizations kind of get fixated, and we're doing it with AI right now. They get so fixated on latest trends or things
Oh
that are
my
being
gosh.
done, and just a failure to a failure to understand the basic competencies of experience management and what it entails. I had a similar experience, different hotel, um, same country, but again, won't name countries, but I'm not saying it's a country level factor. Um, One of the most beautiful hotel rooms I've ever stayed in my life. Um, the interpersonal service on the ground floor with everybody was incredible. The general manager of the hotel was there to greet my wife by name as she went to breakfast, and we couldn't figure out how she figured out her name and everything, and all the staff were great. But when I went to get out of the shower to hang up my towel, there's no place to hang it up. There was no hook, there was nothing. And and I don't want to sound like I'm the picky guy, but these are all basic little things. If you've done, journey mapping is part of the process, but it's understanding the purpose and the reasoning behind it, right? So like the hotel room was gorgeous. They hadn't missed a detail in the room itself with the furniture and the accoutrements and everything that were in the room. But they just lost a basic thing that, at least once, if not twice a day, our guests are going to take a shower. Now let's go
Mm.
through those steps and what does that look like? And what are they going to need? They're going to do this, they're going to do A, B, C, and D. Same thing with the kettle. It was interesting. They made sure that the room had everything, but they never thought about how are they going to use it? What does this look like? What are the challenges going to be? One of the other, and I hate to make all these examples about hotel rooms, but oftentimes you have to be a contortionist or a gymnast to reach the toilet paper and hotel, right? And hotel rooms, you're doing this or whatever. But it's amazing. I was on a cruise ship. I think it was a river cruise in Europe. And it was amazing. Let me give you a positive example. So I've kind of blown out the negatives here,
Do it.
right? In
Let's do
terms
it.
of, so same situation in the bathroom and but here they figured it out. They figured it out because what they did is they put the toilet paper roll inside the vanity with a little slot in the vanity door for the toilet paper to come out the vanity. So, they were saying, where on the wall do we put the toilet paper roll without giving any thought to how the person's going to use it? Instead, they thought about, the space and the limit, you're thinking about a bathroom on a ship. Usually they tend to be smaller. Um, and they installed it inside the vanity through the door, so it was right there where you need it. Two very contrasting, in one regard, everything's beautiful, impeccable, but they never took a journey-based approach, or we always talk about empathy, and I think this is one of the things that bothers me about our industry too, is we always talk about empathizing with a customer, but how often do we operationalize that? It's one
Right.
thing to try to understand, but then say, okay, now having understand the customer and not just the steps they go through, but who are our customers? Where are they coming through from? How have they traveled? They must be tired because what's interesting, same hotel with the towel thing, from the bellman to bringing cold beverages and the lobby and all those little things were great. All those details, but somehow they miss a detail on the towel. Now, the good thing at that hotel, this same general manager, she was very proactive from day one. She said, if you have any feedback, please let me know. She was very proactive from day one, the first time we met, in wanting to know if there were any issues, if anything could be improved, they wanted to know about it. So I did. Having this issue with the bath towel, I told her about it. And what was really great is the next day when I saw her, she said, I've spoken to the owner and we've already discussed it and we're taking action on it. Now, they didn't come and I was hoping they would come and install something in the
Hmm.
bathroom, but I
Hmm.
was only there for a few days. But I have no doubt that they did. So, I think that's the key thing. Um, for the most part, they got it. they miss this little thing because maybe they hadn't taken a systems approach or a journey-based approach to it. Um, but they had created the culture in the organization that allowed for the feedback and the utilization for the feedback to improve the experience.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the hotel where I had the steam jacket kettle, not the same culture, you know. It was clear when I walked in the, into the lobby, nobody ever greeted me. I don't not even sure they knew I
Right.
stayed in the hotel. But
Right. Well, and that those opposing stories really,
mhm,
to your point about operationalizing this beyond just having empathy, really comes back to fundamentals, right? And
yeah,
the fundamentals and the empowerment and what's the expectation that's being set. Because, the expectation with the example of the GM who was truly interested and eager to make an impact on the future experiences that guests had is very different than probably the person who this steam kettle got delegated to, and they just went out and found whatever they could and threw it in the room without even thinking, does it
hmm
fit any of the plugs, right?
hmm 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 hmm
So pivoting a little bit, Tom, I always talk about, where are you? I mean, my gosh, just in the last few months, it seems like you've been in Europe and Singapore and Vietnam and now Thailand. And I know that you're a student of the world, I'll
Yeah,
say.
yeah.
And one of the things that I really appreciated about you and your perspective about the program that I had the privilege of teaching in, the MSCXM program in the Broad College of Business at Michigan State University, is that you really stress the importance of integrating a perspective on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging into the
hmm
program itself, which I was a big fan of. And one of the themes that I'll say, unfortunately, seeing over the last, say, year is just a massive de-investment in
hmm
DEI, and really even just general health and wellness. What do you think the downstream impacts of those de-investments are going to be in employee and customer experience and the ability for employees to deliver that superior customer experience in the foreseeable future?
That's a great question. Let's start by understanding, um, let's start by understanding what those words mean, what diversity, equity, and inclusion mean, you know. So diversity in terms of, I think all too often when we think of diversity, we think of just differences, I think people simplify it and say we need more people of color working
Yeah,
with us.
yeah, right.
I heard that, and I heard that at the university as well when I was there. But no, I mean, diversity is when I think of diversity, I think of different backgrounds and different perspectives. And, the one thing that I see with all my travel, and to your point, I travel like 9 countries in 2 months. And just, when you see the differences, like all these examples that we've discussed in delivery, but when you see the differences in how experiences are delivered, and many of those differences can be attributed to cultural differences, and both positive and negative. I mean, I've grown to love, having lived in Thailand now 2 years in a row. I've really grown to love the people here and their acceptance of others and acceptance of differences and their general demeanor and their friendliness and care for one another and their ability to make people feel welcome. You know, I've experienced the healthcare system now in Thailand on multiple occasions, both in hospitals and clinics, over the past 2 times I've been here. And never have I felt so welcomed. Where
Hmm.
often in the US, I feel like they're doing me a favor, they make you feel like they're doing you a favor by having you there. Where I feel, whenever I'm in the healthcare system here, I'm made to feel welcome. So when I think of diversity, I think of diversity in thought, diversity in beliefs, and a lot of those do come from different cultural or ethnic backgrounds, and it's and diversity, like in our field, diversity in disciplines. Often we think of user experience or customer experience. It's important, or employee experience. So, um, yeah, it's understanding that diversity is more than simply checking a box about ethnicity or
Yeah.
gender or otherwise. It's creating an environment in your organization where, and this, I think this is where equity and inclusion come into, that differences are encouraged. It's important to get people from different backgrounds, whether it's your sexual orientation or where you've lived, or, you know, and to me, it's like and sometimes the analogy of a salad's been made. I mean, do you want to eat iceberg every day? You know, you just want to eat iceberg every day, or do you want, a mix of greens and tomatoes, and it's just so much more enriching and enjoyable, which is why I choose to live abroad. I spent most of my life living in the US and different states. Granted, part of that was in Hawaii, which feels like a different country. But that's why I love living abroad, because to me, every day is an enriching experience because I get exposed to influences and stimuli that are so different and that I learn from, you know? And for me, a lot of it is learning about experience delivery. And, like in the banking industry here is fascinating. Bank branches and shopping malls, they generally have a floor or an area in a shopping mall where they might have 4 or 5 different banks next to each other.
Hmm.
Um, And it kind of tells you, boy, people here must be loyal to their banks, and they're open 7 days a week, you know.
Wow.
Yeah, fancy that, right? Um, and they don't, in general, you don't see teller counters. You see chairs in front of, you see, let me sit down in front of you. If I'm going to do business with you, I want to sit down in front of you, to understand you. This isn't about moving people through a line and getting them out. And even the seating area for waiting customers. And I'll send you a photo, the latest one I snapped of Bangkok Bank
Please
here.
do.
It's gorgeous. It was just gorgeous. But my point is, from a diversity standpoint, it's not just about meeting quotas. It's about, it is about getting diversity of backgrounds in your organizations, because those people, when I think about everything I've seen over the past 2 months in 9 different countries, and if you look at the complexity of the backgrounds of people in the US through immigration and everything else, and how their upbringing and their cultural influences and where they've worked and how they were educated, and gender differences. When I think of what women go through in their life as opposed to men, and it's important to have those differences there, so you have the opportunity to be exposed as an organization to differences of beliefs and opinions and shaping what you do. I mean, how white males, well, and I hate to, go along just gender lines, but how one group of people view things is going to be can be very different than others.
Hmm.
Males are going to look at things differently from women because of their roles in their life, and even physiology, and a whole wide range of things. And then now to also bring along different cultural perspectives on top of that, or differences in skin color. I mean, the reality is, depending upon your skin color, maybe, like we've learned things about the skin of Black people in terms of um, dry skin, and for healthcare. So it's always to get as much many of those differences as possible is just from an information standpoint is just amazing. Um, but also creating an environment. So moving on to equity and inclusion, you know, creating an environment in an organization where people feel supported in their role and they don't feel threatened or intimidated, you know, um, whether it's along gender lines and people feel pressured or otherwise, but um, it can only benefit people. I guess that's the way I've always felt. Diversity can only
Mhm.
benefit people. The more diversity you have, the richer the environment you have, whether it's a workplace or whether it's an entire country. Um, so when companies cut back, they lose that. They lose that, and they go. What they do is, I think in my humble opinion, is now when you now you're minimizing people's opinions, and you're minimize when you reduce equity in the workplace, when you reduce inclusion in the workplace, um, let alone the diversity, how does that make people feel about their job every day, right? You know,
Yeah.
everybody needs to feel safe and secure and hopefully empowered in what they do. Um, but then to do it in a workplace with people from diverse backgrounds, it's so enriching. Um, so, you know,
Yeah, I agree. And even just from the not even just the philosophical perspective, but actually from a business results perspective,
yep,
right?
exactly.
Because one of the
Exactly.
things that in order to be truly customer driven or even
Yep.
customer centric, I'll say just customer aligned, right? That's a really good way of phrasing it. Being customer aligned as opposed to customer derailing. So in order to be customer aligned, you have to avoid groupthink. And, to
Yeah.
to
There you
harp
go.
on
To
a
your
point
point.
that you
Yep.
made, right?
Yep.
If
Yep.
it's just a bunch of, 25-year-old white males sitting around the table, that
Exactly. Yeah.
perspective of who their customer base is and how they think
Yeah.
about them and how to be
Yeah.
empathetic and how to
Yeah.
deliver something that meets the demands of the customer today, but also is drawing that customer towards some innovation. The thing is, you can't innovate if you're stuck in groupthink. And there have
Exactly.
been, to your
Yeah.
point, dozens upon dozens of studies that have shown that homogeneous groups, so sameness, right,
Hmm. Hmm.
outperform heterogeneous groups only in the short run. But if
Hmm.
you really want to be viable and market competitive and think differently, you have to have a heterogeneous group. You have to have differences of
Yep.
thought, diversity, differences of
Yep.
opinion in order to think about those nuances with different groups and their needs, right?
Yep. Yep. Well, it's just the mindset of the employees too, right? They're going to be more, most people I think are going to be more productive in a heterogeneous um, environment where yeah, diversity of thought is valued and different perspectives and backgrounds are valued. Um, it's just more enriching mentally than, to your point, being in an environment where people are very similar and a group think persists. So, yeah. But, I mean, that's just and I think of myself, you mentioned my background. I grew up in Michigan. I came from a conservative family, relatively conservative, country boy, go to the big university. Um, and and then I met my wife, who's from Singapore, and we got married. And my first job was in China, and I've spent much of my career working in Asia. Imagine what my life would have been like if I'd stayed there. And I think that happens to a
Yeah.
lot of families too. Like when I look at my own family, I've got siblings that have never lived outside a 30-mile radius of where they are now. And vacation times every year are spent working on the deck or, and I think I'm really fortunate that I was given the opportunity, to make that trip when I was 23 to Southeast Asia, to Singapore initially and then China. And it just kind of it created this curiosity in me that has burned my whole life. I often feel sorry for people that don't share that curiosity.
Mhm.
But I also look at relatives and I say, "Guy, that life looks, that simple kind of life, and where that looks comfortable, But you gotta wonder, and that's why I'm always trying to encourage people. I know, hey, come visit or go here or there, and because I'm hoping, and I think that's works the same in an organization. If we can create an environment where we can expose people, and I think as an industry, that's what we're facing now too, is everyone's kind of working in their own silo geographically. You got the US, you got
Mhm.
Europe, you got Africa, and
Mhm.
you South America. Everybody's kind of working their own silo. And then now we have silos on silos. Oh, you got the CX people over here, you got the employee experience people over here.
Yeah.
Now, what happens when they start working together? Holy smokes. And that's what we're trying to do as an organization. We want people to sit down at the table and talk across disciplines and across companies. Like let's talk about AI. How is AI
Sure.
going to increase productivity in your area? Now let's talk to the employee experience person. Let's talk to the UX person. Amazing. For now, we're all with our blinders on in our job every day, and now all of a sudden you get to hear those different perspectives. Now let's multiply that, and this is what we're doing with XM Global with chapters
Yeah.
globally. If you're going to do a workshop, do it in conjunction with another chapter in another country virtually, where members can work in teams and breakouts and discuss different perspectives in their countries. Because, man, I tell you, it's amazing the differences that exist across countries and region in this world. And if you're
Oh,
never exposed to it, you don't get that curiosity or that explosion that I get every time I travel, where you just shake your head and wonder, like I did the first time I went in the shopping mall, and I'm like, five banks side by side. And then I looked at the branch design and I saw this, what had to be a culturally influenced design, you know, that you don't treat people, like going up to a counter and standing there and go is very impersonal, and it doesn't really demonstrate. And the ties are always there's a great deal of respect for one another here. As an elder, I get this subtle, putting of the hands together in a small bow from people, and I do it to them too, just be out of respect. It's a very much
sure.
and it's a beautiful thing. And I think that's reflected in how they operate. Um, and and to learn that and say, wow, you know, when I first saw it, I go, this is really cool, super cool. And then to see what really struck me with Bangkok Bank is they're doing similar things in Vietnam, but only for VIPs. And that made
Mm.
me thinking too, you have cultures where, and Vietnam is very much that kind of culture, it's about, yeah, we want to give personalization and luxury, not to everybody, but to VIPs. We wanted to make it
Yeah.
a status thing. And that bothers me. The
Hmm.
ties don't seem that way. It's very much here that, like when I looked at that branch, it wasn't a VIP thing. It was a branch in a shopping mall, and the
Yeah.
seating was high end. It was beautiful, and there were flowers on the table, and this is a bank, you know, much like the waiting area in my doctor's office, where you
Yeah.
walk
Yeah.
in and everybody greets you by name, Sawadee Krap. Um, the the seating is rattan, with a color scheme on the cushions that's reflected in the wall colors, and the music's fantastic. There's a cappuccino machine there. There's a bowl of there are bananas and infused water. But what I notice, not just there, but also in hospitals, what they do is they want to keep you comfortable. So they keep you in a comfortable waiting area where your needs are taken care of, and then they take you to where they need you to go. You know, they don't put you in a cold room and make you wait like is typical in the US where you're staring at posters on the wall about syphilis or or whatever, God knows what, right? You know, but what's be so beautiful there is they get you comfortable, they make you feel comfortable, and they come over, Mr. You know, Mr. Tom or Mr. Thomas, um, could you please follow me? You know, and they take you in a room and they do a blood draw, or they take you to another room for an ECG, ECG, or they take you, the doctors don't leave their offices. They take you into the doctor's office for the consult. And this is true in hospitals as well as clinics. So it's not just, you know, it's not just one clinic. It seems to be across the country. So
So sticking with this
yeah,
theme, I
yeah.
mean, you've
And I know we got
had
way off track on
no,
DEI,
no, we didn't
but
actually. But I mean, so
that's
you've
it. Yeah,
been your professional journey, academia, global
yeah,
consulting, experience management, leadership, the first master's degree in customer experience management, and now the XM Global Collaborative. And one of the themes that we've been talking about, and I'd like to double click on for a minute, is this whole cross-border collaboration, because I think you've
yeah,
articulated pretty freely how the experience of um, uh, different cultures and different practices and principles with different countries, for example, have an impact in shaping how you think about experience
yeah.
management. From your perspective, given this cross-border collaboration that you're emphasizing, what do you see as some global trends in experience management, either employee or customer or both, that the US in particular should be paying attention to from a global perspective?
Wow. Um, well, I think, you know, a global trends. I don't know if it's trends so much. I think there's a global trend to digitalization,
Hmm.
to be able to conduct business in a seamless and transparent way 24 hours a day from your phone. And
Yep.
that's a global trend. Um, um, and you know, what's kind of funny when you travel internationally and talk to people, they seem to feel that the US is leading the world in CX. And I think they are in some ways. You know, I think they are in in many ways, including digital, and that's probably true. Um, but where I think the rest of the world is leading is, and you know, maybe not specific countries, is there's a few things. One is the authenticity of the experience and the genuine nature of the experience. I think the US, to me, it's like a factory,
Hmm.
you know, where experiences has become impersonal, standardized, efficient for operators. You know, I know when I go to most restaurants to the US and I order salads, it's been poured out of a bag, right?
Hmm.
Right.
Hmm.
What I learned living in Ecuador and what I've seen in other countries, when I go out to dinner and I look at the plate, I can tell whether the cook loves what they do.
Hmm.
You know, there's a lot of love in the food in Ecuador. It's a
Hmm.
poor country, um, but the people there, the love for what they do is seen in the food, you know, and they take the time to do it right. You wait longer, but they take the time to do it right. Where in the US, um, it's turned into a factory, you know? And I think it's a reflection of our short-term focus. It's a
Yeah.
short of reaching short-term goals, standard. It's about reaching profit. It's about reaching financial targets. There's no doubt, you know, because then it's also about trimming your workforce. So that's the other thing. What I see in other countries like Thailand, And my wife and I see it in the place where we went to breakfast, where they've added staff recently. They've added staff, and and the way in which they engage with people in such a genuine and authentic way, not in the way in in the U.S. Um, I'm Jamie. I'm going to be your server today. Is everything tasting? I never quite understand this. Is everything tasting okay here? Or whatever that thing about tasting, I never quite understand that question you know, rather than saying, what can we, something along the lines, what could we be doing differently to serve you? Well, how
Hmm.
can I help you? How can I, you know, but it's all this. I feel like I'm a widget on a production line when I quite often in the US, you know. I don't
It can feel
feel
that way.
I don't feel this genuine concern for me or my needs or why I'm there or anything else. But what I do see in other parts of the world is you know, taking the time to be genuine and authentic in what you do, and doing it right. Um, and food is just one part of that, but also the service level and how you're, you know, and how people engage with you. And I've seen some bad
Sure.
examples too.
Oh yeah.
Again, I won't name the city or the country, but my wife and I were there for a week, and we felt like, again, everywhere we went, we felt like they were doing us. We went to a restaurant and it was kind of like, what do you want? The waiter, and they're like, oh, okay, you know. And the food was very much the same way. It was like, it was lukewarm, kind of tasteless and whatever. And we were happy to get out of there. And then we went someplace else. We went to Malta, which was fascinating because, as much as some countries are screaming about immigrants taking jobs, most countries realize that their own people can't fill all the jobs. They don't have the requisite skill sets or people don't want to do the jobs. What's
Right.
fascinating about Malta is they realize if they're if they're going to run as a country, they need help from the outside, particularly in service roles. So I would say every place we went, from grocery stores to restaurants, all retail spaces were all manned by people who were from different countries. I won't call them foreigners because they're not foreigners. They were from India, they were from Ethiopia, they were from the Philippines. Um, but what was clear, they created whoever they work for created a culture where the personalities of these people really came through in a really genuine way, and created incredible experiences. So I'm afraid what's going to happen in the US with digitalization and and more AI and robots is a focus going to be on efficiency and cost reduction, and the consumer's going to suffer because of it.
Yeah.
They're taking the
100%.
human factor out. But what I'm seeing here elsewhere is they're using technology to enhance the experience. So they can take time with you, to be genuine and authentic. It's not the focus isn't on cost cutting. And this is what I think we've been preaching. But in the US, I think they're just going to use it as means to save money. What I've seen overseas is they're using technology to enhance the experience so they can spend more time with you interpersonally, or not feel so rushed, or maybe, it's enhancing the experience. It's not taking away from it, which is what I see in the US. So,
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And one of the themes that I'm seeing a lot of is, particularly over the last year to 2 years, a major uptick in private equity acquisitions. They're doing it very quietly, right? Because they don't have to
yeah,
announce anything. But a lot of companies moving off the public markets, going into
yeah,
private. And to
yeah,
your point, what we tend to see as a trend is all about let's throw AI at the problem and let's focus on operational efficiency,
yeah,
which does do certain things like improve the balance sheet and it does
Mhm.
maybe help you hit the numbers for the quarter. But, we have to understand too that uh, that environment is very much like house flipping, right? It is
Right.
get in, invest some
Right.
capital, the minimum amount that you can, and maximize profitability and then flip the house for a tidy profit. That does not build customer lifetime value.
Oh,
That
well,
does
think,
not build brand love and affinity.
yeah, so if we're talking about EX equals CX, all right, how does that flipping affect the psyche of the people that work for that organization?
Hmm.
When I was at MSU, I finally got to the point I said, you know, don't be loyal to any company you work for because they're not loyal to you. Always be looking for your next job. And I hate to say that, but I think it's true. You have to, I was trying to protect them because they're doughy-eyed. They're thinking they're going to work for this company the rest of their lives, but then some private equity firm comes along, and next thing, I had one student, she had been out 2 years and had three jobs, you know,
Hmm.
and it's like, so yeah, so you start, we look if you break down employee engagement and what it really means in a comprehensive way, you know. What is my fit with my job? How fulfilled do I feel in my role? Am I being developed
Hmm.
properly? Do I like my job? What is my fit with the organization? Do I support the decision making? Are my personal values consistent with those with the organization? And then lastly, intent to stay and so forth. Well, heck, if you work for a company and a big part of this, if you think about how those first two things I talked about manifest themselves in your job. Those are all part of a great organization that spends time with understanding what your goals are and your values. They help you understand how what you do every day impacts the customer and how it's valued. Empowerment's part of that, right? And developing that
Yep.
relationship. And at the same time, they're educating you on the vision and the mission of the organization and their long-term focus and why what you're doing is really meaningful. I mean, nobody wants to roll out of bed every morning thinking, "Oh, I'm going to make another widget today and make some money." No, they want to, I think people in general want to feel they're making a difference in the world, that they're helping people. But if you
I
work
agree
for
with
an
you.
organization and it's just about reaching financial targets without, and I think you may have alluded to this previously, the best organizations are able to tie customer outcomes with financial outcomes and
Yeah.
understand and employee outcomes, right? They understand how employee outcomes are tied to customer outcomes and financial outcomes and hand in hand. Um, but if all you do is like, oh, yeah, in order to meet our next budget, we're going to have to slash 1,000 jobs, and that's a common. And if you're left dealing with that, if you're not cut, so you're one of the
Yeah.
lucky ones that were
So
left,
to
and you're
speak,
left
you
to
got the baggage
sort. You
though.
got the baggage. Stress level goes up, workload goes. No, you
And
know,
survival guilt. It's
yeah.
real.
So yeah, and you're gonna now all of a sudden care about your job and your employer and be able to deliver a genuine and authentic experience. Give me a break. So,
Yeah.
that's why companies like that are privately held, family owned, and you're going to hear a recurring theme with me around food and hospitality, but look at Chick-fil-A. You know,
Yeah.
say what you will about the values of the owner, but I mean, if you look at their dedication to the customer and how they choose franchisees and how they develop a culture and how they develop their people, and I had their CMO on a podcast a few years ago, or their former CMO, he said they never could have done that if they were a publicly traded company. Look
Yeah.
at In-N-Out. Look at In-N-Out and
Yeah.
their calculated growth, family-owned
Yeah.
company. They made four menu changes since their founding, must be in the 50s, early 60s.
Yep.
Four
And
menu
there's
changes.
always a line out the door
They
in every
keep the
single location.
menu simple. The focus is we keep it simple and we do it well, right? And
Yeah.
then we pull it up, put it all on full display for everybody to see. I love driving through the drive-through and in and out that where I can look, watch people doing their work. And, and and it's, hand cut fries, a
Hmm.
burger, I like mine animal style, cheeseburger, single animal style. But the way they wrap it, they wrap half the
Hmm.
burger. They put it in a, when you go through the drive-through, they say, "Are you eating in your car?" Because they want to know, do I need to bag it or put it in a tray?
Oh, okay.
Again, so if you're eating in your car, they put it in a tray and then they position your burger at a 45-degree angle to do what I say it's smiling at me. My
I
food
love
is
that.
looking. Well, you've heard the phrase people eat with their eyes. I was thinking
Oh,
about that today too. And again, think about most restaurants in the US. And yeah, people eat with their eyes, and that's that way. It's not just with food, it's with everything. So, and when I see the food on the plate and it says, there's a lot of love here. And it is
yeah,
with In-N-Out. There's a lot of love that goes into preparing that food. And and it's a reflection of the culture and how they treat their people and how they pay their people. I heard
yeah,
somewhere that their unit managers may make in excess of $200,000 a year. And no doubt their pay is based on sales targets, but
sure.
they've created this culture around quality and calculated growth where they control the complete
That's right.
supply chain, right? You know,
That's right.
and it's kind of like Trader Joe's is another great example.
That is a great
I mean,
example.
they could blanket this country with Trader Joe's and you wouldn't have enough, but instead people beg for Trader Joe's. Please
It's
come to
it's
my
it's
town so I don't
true.
have to drive an hour and a half. And again, it's about, you're going to do it right. And they've created a culture in the organization where, it's one of those few companies where I get the feeling they hire their customers because when cashiers take the time to comment on what you're buying and tell you how much you're going to love it, you're in a good place because they're in a good place mentally, right? I mean, they're having a good time too. It's clear. It's not just a
Yeah.
job. It's not, the techno, you can improve the technology at the cash register. You also notice they haven't moved to self-checkout, and there's a reason for that too, because they
Yeah.
understand the value of that interpersonal and you walk away, and I don't know how you feel. I walk away saying something nice to the cashier every time I'm there
Yeah.
because I feel they've made an impression. They've
Yeah.
brightened my day. How
Well,
many,
and it creates
how
a
many,
positive flywheel for, that kind of cultural interaction too.
yeah,
People enjoy going there and enjoy
yeah.
interacting. And that
Oh,
is a
yeah,
function
yeah,
of leadership, frankly, and
yeah,
how that leader is setting the tone and the
yeah,
pace. And so as we get closer towards, wrapping our time up here today, with so many CX initiatives failing today due to
yeah.
lack of leadership alignment and employee engagement, what counsel do you have for executives to be able to reframe XM really as part of core business strategy and not just
Okay,
a support function?
okay. First of all, understand what it truly means to be a customer-centric organization
Hmm.
in a comprehensive way. Um, make customer satisfaction and value delivery the purpose of your business, not profitability. Make profitability should be what allows you to continue serving the customer.
Hmm.
You know,
Love that.
I mean, customer experience management. And when I was designing the degree program at MSU in the first course in the degree, it was like customer experience, the motivation behind customer experience management should be to deliver on your customer-centric vision and mission. It's not I'm not don't too much about this means to an end and ends to a mean thing. Because what's happening now, I think most people that are jumping on the CX bandwagon are doing so because they think it should something they should be doing. It's a
Hmm.
buzzword, everybody's doing it. We got to be doing CX. So now it's bolted on. But if you're truly a customer, if your goal is to maximize the satisfaction of your customers and to make their lives better and make them happier and more fulfilling and feel the same way about your employees. You'll do everything at your disposal to do that.
Yeah,
With the understanding that profitability is going to follow. I mean, Amazon's a pretty good example of that. And I know there's a lot of, I mean, there's a lot of arguments against Amazon too, but I think that's the way Jeff Bezos started the thinking was.
sure.
Um, but it's, and I think that's where you've got to be at as an organization. If you want to integrate it as if it's integrated, if it's your business philosophy and your operating practice, it's got to be in your DNA, right? I mean, it's got to come naturally. You can't force it on people. And the people that I've talked to that make it work, when you're moving from a product focused, transaction focused, more relationship, and
Hmm.
it's helping people to understand how what they've been doing every day fits with this, how it supports that. It's not trying to deprogram and I think this is where everybody jumped on the NPS train for years and years where it faltered.
Yeah.
I think it's important you got to meet people in sales where they are in HR and whatever and say, you guys do really, really great things. Did you realize what you're doing is customer centric? Did you realize what you're doing advances our customer goals in this way? You know, and I think that's the way you have to do it. It's kind of like reverse engineering it, where, it's not easy for a business to start out over and be customer centric all of a sudden. Um, but I think most people, most meaningful, most people um, like the idea of working for a customer centric organization. You know.
I
you
tend
know
to agree with that.
yeah,
I tend to agree
and
with that.
and educating people on what that means and what it's going to mean day to day and how it's going to make their work more meaningful. And then rather than totally re-engineering the whole firm and be able to say, you're doing some incredible things that can be considered customer centric. Let's build on those, you know, and at the same time figure out how we're going to work together. And I think, to me, the customer journey, and then I know there's a lot of different journeys, and let's say, helping people in an organization to understand who their customers are. And this is where I think personas have value. I think personas have some of the greatest value in educating employees on who they're there to serve. And then to me, journeys are a great way to show people where what they're doing impacts the customer. Say, did you know what you're doing here impacts here and here? This is a shared experience for all of us. We're all here on this. We're all here to work together to make this work for our customers.
Yeah.
You
And
know,
the reality
and
is most people don't know
they
how
don't.
what they
No,
do impacts
no,
the customer.
no, they don't because their leadership hasn't made it a priority, and the KPIs on which they're evaluated haven't made it a priority,
That's
you
right.
know. And I know we don't have tons of time to talk, but I mean, this is why you need to get things like employee engagement out of HR, and you need to make it a responsibility of management.
Yeah.
If I told you that 40% of your performance evaluation is based on employee engagement scores, you're like, what? What's that? What's employee engagement? Right? Right. All of a sudden, now I've got your attention, and it's not hard to explain to people what employee engagement is and why it's important, how it's reflected in their outcomes, and their responsibility as a leader. You know, I mean, I don't feel disengaged from my work because of how HR treats me. It's
Yeah.
because of how my boss treats me, right?
Yeah, well, that's right. And
Right?
let's also, and I make
No,
this point in my class as well, and this is, I don't want to turn into an HR bashing session here, Tom,
no,
but
and
the
I
reality
think
is
HR's
HR,
got a role. They got a role. But
they do, but their primary role is not the development of the people. It is the protection of the organization and its interests.
there you go.
Secondarily is hiring and developing and promoting and training, and that's secondary.
Yeah.
So,
But it's in
so
a
Tom,
partner. Yep. Go ahead.
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, but it's in partnership. with people across the organization, right?
It should
That's
be.
and that's a key thing.
It
Yeah,
should
yeah,
be. Yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah.
Tom, what's next for the XM Global Collaborative?
Oh man. Well, we'll be coming up on our annual um our first anniversary the first week of March. We have 12 chapters um globally stretching from San Francisco, where you're chapter president, all the way to Perth, Australia.
Yes, you're
Um,
now
there's
looking,
about some
ladies and gentlemen, at the new chapter president for the XM Global Collaborative for the Bay Area.
uh,
Tom is
uh,
extremely influential.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think we have a pretty compelling vision. The biggest challenge is to get people, to get them out of their comfort zone, to understand, what one thing I hear a lot in our industry is how alone people feel.
Hmm.
They're one or two or few people in experience management in the organization. Um, we want people to feel they're supported and they're not alone, and they're not just supported by people in a local chapter operation, but they're supported globally.
Hmm.
Um, our emphasis as an organization is twofold. It's virtually, and how can we reach people and support them virtually through virtual programs. We have an online mentorship program, we have an online repository and community forum and so forth. Um, but it's also um, creating these communities on the local level where people can build relationships and support one another. And then in collaboration, and that's the other thing. The other thing that's really unique about us is hands-on learning and learning across different disciplines, which is why you'll see it's not CX collaborative
Hmm.
because those disciplines tend to work in silos. So it includes people from divergent disciplines across the XM spectrum. Um, but, working to help them to collaborate across cultures and borders, and which is where, um, working with chapters on collaborative events is a great way. Creating opportunities for chapters to collaborate on events across borders is really um, fortuitous. And we have plans. We have plans to sometime this year to launch an academy, an online academy that spans 5 categories of core competencies and 16 sub-competencies. So a total of 5 certificates and across 16 different sub-competencies. Um, that can be taken at the chapter level or taken individually, asynchronously online using a learning management system. So our focus is very much on continuous improvement. We believe things change every day. But more importantly, similar to the approach at MSU, we need to be, broad in terms of our understanding of the competencies that are necessary to be effective in our industry and really deep in the skills. Because the sad reality is we have more experts now and more consultants we've ever had before, and we're failing miserably as an industry. Um,
Yeah.
Customer experience index scores have been on the decline the past 4 years, including a 20% decline last year. And for people that don't know what that means, what it means is customer perceptions of the quality of experiences have been declining for 4 consecutive years. So, uh,
20% though, that's pretty massive. I
a
hadn't heard that
significant,
stat before.
yeah, significant drop. So, we have a
Unbelievable.
lot of work to do, and it comes with humility and a lot of hard work. I'm not a, yeah, so
Well, and one of the trends that I've seen, I go back 6, 7 years ago, and so just before we wrap up here,
yeah,
just to put it in
yeah,
perspective, I had a associate at a company that I worked with, and he got poached by a bank to be their chief customer experience
hmm
officer,
hmm
and he went over there, and they were paying him $775,000 base salary
Wow.
plus about $1 million a year on top of that in stock and equity grants.
Wow. Wow.
And he was there for 2 years. It was very miserable, he said. And then they just eliminated his job, and they've never backfilled it. And I've
Wow.
seen that trend where about,
Yeah. Yeah.
6, 7, 8 years ago, the CXO was hot, hot, hot.
Right.
And
Right.
now that function is just getting absorbed into
Wow.
broader, more general marketing functions or analytics
Yeah.
functions. And the same thing is happening with, to some extent, EX practices, but
Mm.
it's almost just defaulted to, let's just do an annual engagement survey and hope to God that the scores this year are better than they were
Mm.
last year, right? I mean, but that's not being proactive or forward thinking, or shaping the experiences
Right.
that employees and customers are going to have going forward. And I think that's a big
Right.
miss. I think
Yeah,
it's a
it's
big
it's a
miss.
big miss, but I mean, at the same time, and this is why we created the master's degree at MSU. A lot of those people were ill prepared to for the roles that they were trying to fill.
Mm,
Very few people had the requisite skill sets. They came from sales, or they came from marketing, they came from advertising. They learned on the job. They learned by
mm,
going, watching webinars or going to conferences. Um, and the goal really of the master's program was to create tomorrow's CXOs by
yeah,
developing the comprehensive set of skills. I mean, at the same time, and no ill will towards the survey companies, but I think a lot of people were convinced by salespeople that if they bought a software system, that it was going to solve all their problems. They called it a customer experience management system, which it's not. It's a
yeah,
it's a database. It's a means of collecting data and analyzing it, but that's a very small part of the equation. And
that's right.
we did a study last year, and we identified the top 10 reasons why experience management initiatives fail. And it wasn't from a lack of journey maps or surveys. Five of the 10 reasons fell under organizational factors: short-term
Yeah,
focus, um, inability to change, lack of strategy or vision, and so forth. Um, and two, so now we're at five. Now we're at seven. Two had to do with employee experience and empowerment. Lo and behold,
mm,
areas that are rarely discussed in the CX world. And then three in between, that had to do
yeah,
with data or whatever. And, if you consider CX to be your call center, if you consider CX to be your survey, you're you're missing the whole point. I mean,
yeah.
there's a
Totally agreed.
reason why we call it, and I think MSU were some of the first to put M on it. We wanted to make CX a managed process, um, and and anyways,
As
uh,
it should be.
yeah,
As it should be.
as it should be. But yeah, I
So
think,
the
yeah,
as we land
yeah,
the plane here, Tom.
yeah.
So my signature wrap up here is the
Uh-oh.
two things, right? Which is basically an extension of like a stop, start, and continue. So if you had one piece of advice for leaders to start
Oh.
doing tomorrow to improve their experience management programs, what would that be? And one piece of advice to stop doing to improve,
Oh,
what would that be?
oh man, I should have read my prep notes a little closer. Um, I'm gonna come back, I'm gonna so the first thing, I'm gonna come back to the same mantra that I've been that I've been hitting on, is understand what it truly means to be a customer-centric organization and what that means in its entirety in detail, across the organization. I can't stress it enough. Very few leaders want to engage in that discussion, because I think you'll find that your failures, um, and that includes understanding the importance of employee experience and engagement.
Hmm.
It includes um, it includes um, spending more money on qualitative research rather than trying to operate alone uh, on NPS and simple survey data, you know. So uh, that's my recommendation because I think what companies often do is they look at CX maturity and maturity, that's more strategic and it doesn't always unbundle all the aspects of what customer centricity means and how um, yeah, I think most leaders in some way, shape, or form have oversimplified what it is that we do. And it's extremely complex, but it doesn't have
Hmm.
to be if you understand it, you know, it's understanding um the nuances and facets of what it means to be a customer-centric organization. It's a lot, but I think it's a great place to start. And if you haven't started there, then everything else downstream is irrelevant and it's not going to stick. So that's the thing I'm recommending they do. What do they stop doing? Yeah, can they stop talking about NPS? Can we stop talking about MPS? I mean, MPS is literally, when you look at, and you know this as a researcher, an academic researcher, when you look at the path of antecedents being the things that we measure, um, um, the things that when we look at human behavior, whether it's employee psychology or human psychology, the willingness to recommend, and this is just a promise to do something. How many promises do customers, employees and customers not follow through on that they say they're
Yeah.
going to do? So, so many businessmen are hinging huge decisions on NPS scores, um, and uh, but not understanding all of the underlying psychological processes and things they could be measuring that finally result in that.
Hmm.
Why is a bit, and I guess it gets back to the first question. Why as an industry aren't we talking more about desired emotional states, both employee and customer? I mean, most everything we do every day, every whether it's work or decisions we make as consumers, is to change, not to check a cognitive box off a thing, but to change our emotional states. Why aren't we talking more about that? Understanding and designing for emotional states and measuring for emotional states. Why aren't we talking more about trust and
Yeah.
its relationship and moderating? And you know what moderation and mediation and but,
Yeah.
in mediating
Yeah.
the relationship between customer satisfaction and loyalty, we have so much work to do as an industry to help people who work in this field on a day-to-day basis to better understand how the human mind works, both in terms of how they evaluate their jobs and what they want to get out of it. Um, why aren't we using the tools? Why aren't we using the tools we use to understand customers to better understand our employees? We went through a horrendous, the healthcare system went through horrendous, their people went through hell during COVID.
Yeah.
But they weren't willing to spend the money on qualitative research to really understand their people and what they went through and help them and better meet their needs in the future. We should be creating empathy maps and jobs, and using frameworks we use in CX for EX as well. Why aren't we talking about jobs to be done for employees? Why aren't we
Yeah.
talking about empathy maps for employees? Why are we still, yeah, this is another thing, people. Why are we, stop putting CX equals or EX equals CX out there as if it's some new thing.
Yeah.
We've done tons of research in academia, including my dissertation over 20 years ago on that, you know. Um, so. Yeah, let's get off NPS. Let's stop talking about it. Let's start measuring important things, things that actually lead to reflect loyalty and lead to loyalty and on and creating accountability across the firm for all the factors that are driving it. So I know that was a lot, and we're probably
No, that was excellent. And
45 minutes over
interestingly enough,
time,
I
but
mentioned that I interviewed Rob Markey, who's one of the co-creators of the Net Promoter Score, for my book, and even he would agree with that. It was never
I
intended to
mean,
be a
you know,
vanity
yeah,
metric.
I mean, the article, I mean, I read Reichel's article when it first came out. You know, I was a doctoral student and my research was in services marketing and employees and and I thought it made sense. So it was brilliant. You know, it was the one thing you should measure because ultimately it reflects someone's trust in the brand, right? But um but we stopped measuring trust, you know. We wanted to go, you know, and again, I think I mentioned this previously, you know, we work in a fast food industry, not just in how we deliver experiences, but how we think about them and how we execute on them, um, and how we develop our people. You know,
Yeah.
we have globally this addiction with simple, cheap, and easy certificates and let's be certified. We have certification pro those you're a certified expert for life. Just pay your $500 and take a test and you're an expert,
Right.
you know. And we're addicted as an industry. I call it a fast food mentality for development. But we have so far to go as an industry, so far, just
Yeah.
on bundling the psychological and emotional processes of employees and customers is would be a huge development,
Yeah.
and measuring for that in a meaningful way, and helping people in our industry to understand the simple, and I know you've mapped this out, to understand the simple connection between employee experience and not getting employee experience confused with engagement. Employee experience
Truth.
is a necessary but not sufficient condition for employee engagement. There's
100%.
other variables, but most people in our industry don't know the difference between those two or
No.
how, you know, so we need to spend more time on, educating people on how it's actually quite simple, but it's creating accountability right there. Um,
100%
yeah,
agreed.
but
Wow, and
anyway,
that's why I'm so happy to be, part of the XM Global Collaborative and
we're
pushing
trying,
that
we're
agenda
trying.
forward, which I think is just incredibly important right
We're
now.
we're we're trying. Well, this has to be your longest episode ever, I'm
It
sure.
is the longest episode.
As a person
Number
who
one for
edits here. Yeah,
2026 is
yeah,
also
yeah,
the longest. So,
yeah.
so Tom, as we wrap up here, first of all, thank you, and thank you for sponsoring my podcast.
Anytime.
I'll say thank you, Dr. Tom DeWitt, for actually being part of this today too. How can
Yeah.
people best get in touch with you?
LinkedIn. Yeah,
LinkedIn.
LinkedIn.
There you go.
I'm at the top of the list. Tom DeWitt. I'm at the top of the list of Tom DeWitt's on LinkedIn, so I'm easy to
There you
find.
go. Tom, number
Tom
one Tom
DeWitt.
here.
Yep.
So.
There you go. There you go.
Well, thank you so much for being
All right,
on. Thank you
man.
for
You
staying up
bet.
so late with us.
No
Appreciate
problem.
everybody for watching or listening, and we'll see you next time. This is James Killian signing off until next episode. Thanks, everybody.